We've got about half an hour, and I'm going to do two things. I'm going to tell a story first, which is the Tamiflu story seen from our side. Our, meaning the Cochrane review group dealing with this particular drug. And then I'm going to tell you what I think the implications of what we have found so far are. So this is the index, the story from 99 to date, and then I'm going to talk about why I personally believe, and my colleagues believe with me, that Cochrane reviews based on publications should really be a thing of the past, unless the business model of the journals changes. I should apologise, but I was taught never to apologise at the beginning of a presentation. I have to show you a glossary of new terms. Please take a second to have a look at these. That's because I'm going to introduce you to a language which to regulators is nothing new, but to people who are born and bred and grown up on publications, they will find quite disturbing. For instance, if a trial, which is commonly referred to as Nicholson 2000, so first author and then the year of publication, was in one of our reviews, this title has been substituted for WV15670, and the trial we refer to as 670 for a whole list of reasons that I'll tell you about. So trial IDs will be codes and numbers, and I warn you, it is terribly confusing. So, and probably purposely so. So if there's anything I say, and any term I use, clinical study report, does anybody know, has anybody of you, hands up, who knows what a clinical study report is? 3, 4, 5 people. Clinical study reports are massively complicated, huge reports of clinical trials, usually, but not always, written for regulators. So for instance, modules, I will be referring to modules, which are the building blocks of the clinical study reports of Roche. It is a Roche terminology. I don't know whether they are still using it, but they were using it in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they are essentially their chapters in their clinical study reports. The TOC and the TOCE and the word Stellar are our own medline, because we had to build our own database, because we made a decision, as you know from the story, that we would never again use published information. All we would do is use regulatory information. Regulatory information we defined as a mixture of clinical study reports and other documents which pharmaceutical companies produce, plus regulators' comments. So, clinical study reports and other information plus regulators' comments equals regulatory information, okay? And then the last term is SAP, or SAP, or Statistical Analysis Plan, which is the protocol for the analysis that these guys do. One thing that you should bear in mind is that sometimes these are not dated, and sometimes they post-date the CSR. So this is very important to bear in. So these are all points that we need to bear in mind. Finally, the trial program. We've discovered that looking at one trial at a time is a nonsense. So we try and reconstruct trial programs. That's the whole evidence construction program for a drug or an intervention. Very difficult, because the majority of the stuff, as you know, is hidden. So we start our story. The first version of the neuraminidase inhibitor review, that's the class of drugs called neuraminidase inhibitors. At the moment, there are 2 registered ones, Relenza, GlaxoSmithKline, also known as zanamivir, and oseltamivir of Tamiflu, Roche, but there are others in the pipeline. This is the class of drugs. First appeared in 99, and then had several updates. Of great importance to the story are the 2000, 2006, 2005, 2006 update, and the 2009 update. And I'll explain to you why. And then the subsequent updates with the new methods are in red. Now, in 2009, three things happened. Two of them were very good for us: the pandemic and the cash that came with the pandemic. But the so-called influenza pandemic, do you remember 2009? There was a little bit of concern in 2005. It looked as if the world was going to end in 2005 as well with bird flu. But that didn't quite come about. The 2009 pandemic was declared. That meant a lot of research money. And this is one of the things you should bear in mind, that the world of research spins around money. And things like pandemics and declaration of pandemics are big business for us. And then Hayashi's criticisms, which I will show you in a minute. The 2006 version of the review, which you see here in its Lancet, it's published on the Lancet, so it has to be 100% right. The 2006 version of the review had several novelties, two major novelties. We redid the searches and we incorporated this statement, which you see highlighted, which essentially says that we had found evidence that the use of oseltamivir in a treatment mode affected complications in otherwise healthy adults. These are people who had influenza or influenza-like symptoms. You give them oseltamivir, especially if it's not too long from the onset of symptoms, and you diminish the rate of complications. Essentially what we're talking about here, according to these, to the evidence, was bronchitis and pneumonia. Okay, now this is important. For me, from my point of view, even more important was the other aspect, which is the fact that the drug was capable, according to the evidence that we found, to interrupt transmission. Now, in a pandemic scenario, you understand what that means. It takes about 6 to 9 months to get vaccines produced and distributed. So you need to buy time. You buy time with containment measures, and one of the containment measures has to be Tamiflu, because it interrupts transmission. Okay, so everybody home and everybody take Tamiflu. Now, because Tamiflu is not readily available, you can't just walk into when the pandemic bell goes, you can't just walk into one of those beautiful barges across the road or the red light district and say, hey dear, give me a bit of Tamiflu. Then you can't do that. Then you've got to stockpile it. Okay, so the whole of this was basically provided a scientific rationale for the practice of stockpiling. This statement was based on it wasn't a systematic review, it was a meta-analysis published in 2003 on archives by Laurent Kaiser and colleagues. 6 authors, and the first and last author are the only ones who were not full-time Roche employees. On the left, Professor Laurent Kaiser. On your right, Professor Fred Hayden, a Swiss, I think at the time living in America, and an American living in America. Now, the analysis by Kaiser and colleagues was clearly, it was conclusive, according to them. And you've got to remember that this was a manufacturer-funded meta-analysis of 10 randomized controlled trials, henceforth known as the K10 trials, Kaiser 10 trials. This is another piece of internal slang, K10 trials. So the meta-analysis was based on 10 placebo-controlled trials in otherwise healthy adults in the treatment mode, K10 trials. It was funded by Roche. 4 of the 6 were employees of Roche, clearly identified in the manuscript. Professor Laurent Kaiser says he was an unpaid consultant, so that's what he says. And the last author was Professor Hayden, was a paid consultant to Roche at the time of writing this. Now, you will see these 2 bills. The 2 bills on the left are the organizations which subsumed the Kaiser recommendations. They either said, yes, it's correct, or they even made policy on them. Now, you will notice some very strange things in this. On the left, you've got, for instance, Roche.com, which is the European Roche-sponsored website. But on the right, you've got Tamiflu.com, So Roche.com is saying, yes, it does affect complications, but Tamiflu.com says, no, it doesn't affect. And then you will see that great clown in the sky, Cochrane, the Cochrane collaboration, changing its tune from 2006 to 2009, crossing the divide. You will also see that you've got some regulators on the left and the FDA on the right. And the reason that this situation was all these organizations said that the Kaiser claims on the complications were unproven. So what the hell's going on? We've got several regulators saying one thing, public health bodies saying one thing, the public health body of America, CDC, saying it works against complications, its regulator says unproven claim. Let's look at the Kaiser meta-analysis. It was made up of 10 trials, the K10. One of the K10 trials was published, Professor John Traynor, as you can see, in JAMA in 2000. And the only other one that was published was by Professor Carl Nicholson, UK. The first one is an American scientist, the second one is UK, is an English scientist, and it was published on Lancet in 2000. Now, there's only one other piece of, shall we call it, grey literature, which was this abstract, which became known as the Traynor 2000B abstract from a IDSA, Infectious Disease Society of America, meeting in New Orleans before Katrina in 2000. And this was referenced in the Kaiser, and this appeared to relate to a study, randomized control trial of about 1,450 individuals. Pretty big trial, but it wasn't quite clear what the abstracts was based on. It said that Tamiflu affected complications. Now, here's Dr. Keiji Hayashi. You probably can't see him. In July 2009, this Osaka pediatrician, hello Andrew. Hello. This Osaka pediatrician posted on the Cochrane website, on our group's website, a series of comments. Now, usually comments are discarded, but we can't. I like to discard comments, especially if they're nasty comments, but I can't. Under Cochrane rules, we'll respond to these comments within 6 months, and this was no exception. By that stage, the Kaiser meta-analysis had made it into the pantheon of great decision-making. This is the American HHS with statements that you can see which are based on the Kaiser meta-analysis. So it provided a scientific rationale for all of this. For stockpiling, for the use of Tamiflu during the 2009 pandemic, and so on. Also going on some years before, though, was another very strange thing. The FDA makes up what they call warning letters to pharma. When they breach rules, the FDA produces this warning letter. And they produced this warning letter, which was dug out by my colleague Peter Doshi he's very good at digging stuff out of websites. And he found this in the FDA website. This was a warning letter from FDA to Roche saying, you produced this leaflet, here reproduced. This is actually in the document. This document had been around for about 9 years before we saw it. It says that this claim that serious bacterial infections may begin with influenza-like symptoms or may coexist with, occur as complications during the course of influenza, but Tamiflu has not been shown to affect them. You have to take that claim out, FDA said, because it has not been shown to affect complications. We saw no evidence during the approval process in '99. And that, in fact, explains why you have two versions of the Roche website, one for America and one for Europe, because the American regulators will not allow them to make these claims. Also, the other claim, which has never surfaced in America, is the interruption of transmission claim. FDA does not allow that. CDC, of course, does. provide an HHS providing another building block for the stockpiling of the drug. So Tamiflu has not been shown, FDA, you have to take it off, and they did. CDC promotional material is dated 2010, continues saying that they may also prevent serious complications, the use of antivirals, and especially Tamiflu. And here we are again, back to our timeline. You following me so far? Now, here's Hayashi's comments. Hayashi's problem in its simplest wording is as follows. You do Cochrane reviews. How can you trust stuff that you have never seen? That was the question. And Dr. Hayashi was absolutely right. We had taken on faith the Kaiser meta-analysis. 8 out of the 10 Kaiser trials have never been published, never been seen outside Roche, maybe Kaiser, maybe Hayden, we don't know. So what did we do? Well, in the summer of 2009, in the midst of this pandemic, I wrote an email to both of these authors and said, could you please provide us with the raw data that you used for your meta-analysis? And they answered that the dog had eaten their study. They couldn't get hold of it. That was their first answer. When asked, Professor Trenner didn't answer my emails. However, later he answered emails, phone calls from the BMJ. And he said, as far as I can remember, I was never in New Orleans in the year 2000. So I couldn't have presented this. However, Roche's Dr. David Reddy said it's not infrequent that you may have somebody who authors, but they don't actually present at a conference. It depends upon their availability. So here we've got people who cannot respond questions on their own trials, and people who presented didn't present. I'm not quite sure whether this is a ghost presenter. Would this be a ghost presenter? You know all about ghosts. There's ghosts of two kinds. There's a first degree ghost and second degree ghost. The first degree ghost is the one that ghosts writes. The second degree ghost is the one whose name appears on publications 4 years after his death. And he is claimed to have seen and approved the final version of the manuscript. This is not a joke. This is happened on the journal circulation, highly respected. Third type, Andrew?
I just wondered in your next version whether you can, instead of calling it a presentation, call it an absentation.
So, the BMJ, in the person of Dr. Deb Cohen, asked a few more questions of Professor Nicholson and Professor Trenner. Professor Nicholson said, I didn't actually see the raw data. I can't really answer your questions. You've got to go and see Roche. Everybody was sending us to Roche. In fact, not only I didn't see the raw data, I didn't write the final manuscript. Dr. Trenner said that he'd written the manuscript, but he also hadn't seen the final, the raw data, and he'd seen summary data. So both of them couldn't answer the questions. They couldn't answer anything about these trials, which were in fact, de facto, were abandoned. Now, I ask you, does all this story, does it all matter? Because, I mean, if it doesn't matter, it's just a great, great Sherlock Holmes story. And it's great fun to find these bits and pieces out. And I'm sure the regulators are absolutely wetting themselves listening to this story, or this great dawning that people have, or the fact that your 10 pages in journals are simply a compressed, extreme synthesis of what is available. Well, as a matter of fact, it does matter, because we have found some serious discrepancies between the clinical study reports that we then got hold of, thanks to EMA, and the published versions of these studies. But of course, we could not ask the so-called authors, because they couldn't give us any answers. They wouldn't have been able to give us any answers. Now, Roche did, in this case. They said that the 10 serious adverse events which had been reported in the clinical study reports, had not made it into print because the authors used their medical judgment not to publish them. The problem with that statement is that the authors were not medically qualified, because the authors, both females, one of them had an MA, the other one had a PhD in biochemistry. We know who they are. They were employees of a communications agency, ADIS. Now, I never heard of a biochemist making a medical judgment on whether a serious adverse event should be included in a publication or not, but it may be a first time for everything. So anyway, by that stage, we had funding deadlines, and all we could do is publish an updated version of the review, which didn't have the Kaiser data, and so we decided that we couldn't conclude anything, which is what most Cochrane reviews do. We also made this, there also came out this monograph on the BNJ, which caused a lot of a flurry of activity. However, the story is not finished. The story goes on, because Cochrane reviews are never still. They get updated. So we got some more funding, and they asked us to do this to the 2012 update. And for the 2012 update, I remind you of Hayashi's criticisms. We decided that trusting publications was no longer an option. We had worked out in a way in which I haven't got time to describe that 60% of the information, randomized information from human beings in Tamiflu treatment trials had never seen the light of day, and the 8 unpublished trials, Kaiser trials, were only part of that. We had identified that we couldn't trust the statements made in the publications, and so we decided that we were only going to use regulatory information for our reviews. Right or wrong, that's our stance at the moment. Now, of course, all this was facilitated by the EMA's change of policy and by the lightning fast reactions of the EMA to our questions and to our requests. The EMA sent us what they had, which was parts of 16 trials of Tamiflu. At the time, we thought we got the majority of them. Now we know there's at least 123 trials. But this has taken about 3 years to reconstruct, and we're not even sure that that's the total. So when you ask me how many trials there are, I have to tell you I don't know. Not all of them, about 7 or 8, are not published, are not sponsored by Roche. Now, just to give you some idea of the complexity of all this, look at this is a screen of what or part of what we got from the EMA. For instance, if you look at the third line from the top, you will see in red, you will see that there is a code, there's a number of pages, 8,545, there's 4 modules, it's a phase 1 that was done in January 2001, and, sorry, the report, the CSR was written then, but the trial finished in August, September 2000. And there's the title. So what difference does it make? Well, let's take this very example. This is WP 16263, which is a phase 1 cardiotoxicity trial on healthy volunteers. Now, there are 2 versions of this. There's the clinical study report, which is complete, which Emma got complete and we got complete, and it's 8,500 pages. And there's a publication 10 years after completion of trial, which is 6 pages long. This is the publication, and the arrow is pointing to the word placebo. Can you see it? Methods, it's described as a placebo-controlled trial. See? See it from the bottom? This is what an index of a CSR looks like, not this particular one. Let's see all the modules. And here is what the trial I'm referring to looks like if it were published. Don't worry, this is Peter Toshi's desk at Johns Hopkins. These are reams of paper that we did not print the trial. Okay, so the greens amongst you, rest assured, we did not print the trial. Okay, so I've only got time for another 2 or 3 slides, I'm afraid, and then we can pick it up in discussion. But this is what I want to show you. The part on the left is the descriptive part, is what we call the talking. It's the description of the trial. Talk, 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 talk. It's the stuff, methods, introduction, discussion, references, and other bits and pieces. The stuff on the right are the individual listings. It's the IPDs, the individual patient data. If it were on paper, that's what it would look like. Okay, now think about the six printed pages. So what do we miss? Well, let's take a walk through this clinical study report. Let's go, for instance, to page 422 and page 423. These are certificates of analysis. Some of you will never heard of this. Certificate of analysis is supposed to be an independent audit of the active principle and the control. What it looks like, what it contains, what it smells like, what it tastes. Can you see? On the left is the active principle, on the right is a description of the placebo capsules used in this phase 1 volunteer trial. Can you see any problems, left to right? Any discrepancies?
Yeah.
What?
The capsules. The capsules.
Yeah. The cap of the placebo is of a different colour. Now, does it matter? Does it matter for the trial? You can't say that. You cannot say that. For sure. You don't know. Okay. What you do know is that this is wrong. This is a description in the clinical study report saying matching placebo. It's not matching placebo. Now, it may be important, it may not be important, we don't know. The point is, we would never know based on the publication, and we would probably never know based on a simple, quick reading of that mountain of paper. That's the point. And this is what happens when you trust publications. I haven't got time to go through this. This is a medical officer's report, FDA, pointing out to major problems with the two so-called Trenner and Nicholson studies that were actually pivotal studies that were put forward for the FDA NDA in 1999. We made a terrible effort, very time-consuming. We had to build our own resources to index all this material, and we even built our own depository, online depository. The 5th version of the review is out. It was out in January, and its conclusions are that probably because we do not have the data, despite asking for it for 3 years, probably Tamiflu does not act the way that Roche says it does. And we found no evidence of complications or on transmission, interruption of person-to-person spread. Essentially, what's missed with, if you don't look at regulatory information, is all that I've said. That is the cost of pressing a button and accessing Medline. Can we make the statement for all drugs? I don't know. But certainly, recently, some very disturbing stories, like that of Avandia. I'm sure you're all Avandia and Actos, the two glitazones, both of them, EPO, and so on. There's a long, long list. If you read Ben Goldacre's book or David Healy's Pharmageddon, the list is there. We're left with unanswered questions, which were unanswered in 2009 and still are unanswered. We don't know what the effects of this drug are. On the surface, based on what we have seen from regulatory information, it affects symptoms. It shortens them by 24 hours. That's it. Doesn't do much else. There's also the key question of toxicity, which we're looking into today, or this time round in the review. And we still have more and more and more unanswered questions. Who is responsible for deciding not to publish studies? Who are the authors of these studies? And what does authorship mean? These are some of the questions, and if you want, we can pick them up in the debate. What are we going to do about medical journals? What are we going to do about research synthesis? And shouldn't regulation be made on all the evidence and not just the evidence that is agreed on between pharma and regulators? We need new ethics, first of all. We need new concepts, we need new laws, and we need new methods. But the resource bill is not the easy way. The resource bill is horrendous. Finally, if you want to have a look, have a read of this op-ed on the New York Times. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for listening.